Welcome to episode 249 of CppCast, the first podcast for C++ developers by C++ developers. I'm your host, Rob Irving, joined by my co-host, Jason Turner. Jason, how you doing today?
I'm all right, Rob. How are you doing?
Doing okay. Just another day, man.
As one of my friends recently put it, it's the 78th of March right now.
Yeah, that's a good way to describe it. I can't believe that we're almost in June already. Like, the past 2 months, I felt long, but they've also kind of gone by rather quickly.
Yeah.
Both at the same time. Yeah.
Almost June. Tomorrow's my anniversary. 20 years.
Happy anniversary to you and Jen.
Thank you.
All right. Well, at the top of every episode, I'd like to read a piece of feedback. We got this email from Pankaj, and I apologize if I messed up your name, but says, Hi, Rob and Jason. I'm a big fan of CppCast and C++ Weekly. I never miss out on any of your episodes. I really liked your previous episode with Martin, as it gave some perspective about Catch from the maintainer's perspective. Is it possible to have an episode on emulation programming with C++? I am sure it'll be an interesting episode, as Jason has already worked on a bunch of them by now. Keep up the good work. Did we? Was MAME? Is that an episode on emulation?
We did have an emulation. Yes. Yeah. MAME's with Miodrag.
Yes.
Okay. And also, I don't want people people seem to think, oh, well, Jason's clearly done a bunch of these things. I've written like half of an emulator. So
your cousin's written a couple in various languages.
In various languages, yes.
Yeah.
I don't, but I think he's only done like one NES emulator in C++, and that was using techniques 20 years ago. So that's probably not a good example either. I've been thinking about who I might reach out to since you shared this feedback with me, Rob. We'll see. Maybe we do a recap or rerun or something like that.
Well, the main episode, I just looked it up, and that was September 2016.
It was a very long time ago.
Pretty long time ago, yeah.
I think it was right before my first CppCon.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that sounds right.
That might be right.
Well, definitely check that episode, Pankaj. But maybe we will look into doing another episode on emulators. Okay. Well, we'd love to hear your thoughts about the show. You can always reach out to us on Facebook, Twitter, or email us at feedback@cppcast.com. And don't forget to leave us a review on iTunes or subscribe on YouTube. Joining us today is Anastasia Kazakova. As a C and C++ software developer, Anastasia created real-time Unix and Linux-based systems and pushed them to production for 8 years. She worked as an intern in Microsoft Research Networking Department and launched the first 4G network in Russia, being a part of the Yoda operator team. She has a passion for networking algorithms and embedded programming and believes in good tooling. With all her love for C++, she is now the product marketing manager on the JetBrains C++ tools and .NET marketing teams. Besides, Anastasia runs a C++ user group in St. Petersburg, Russia. Anastasia, welcome back to the show.
Yeah, it's great to be back.
What is this? I don't think I've ever heard anything about this, you working on the first 4G network in Russia.
Yeah, that was before JetBrains. I was working in Yota. They are the 4G operators in Russia, actually the first 4G operator in Russia. And I joined them exactly at the time they were driving the 4G in Russia, and we were building the whole network. And I was doing the software which helps with all these congestions in the networks, like users' policy, setting the proper channels to them and the proper policy based on various factors. So we did a software system which actually triggers all the stuff. So it was fun. Like, we were really launching the first 4G network in Russia, and there were so many funny stories around that when we were playing and cheating a little bit to show some demos. That was fun. And that was a real-time system. So when you have to sometimes come to work at night to fix something crashing somewhere in the other part of the country, which, is quite big. I mean, like 12 time zones. And if something crashes there during the day, you might be having a night here in St. Petersburg. So, but no one cares. You have to fix it.
Wow.
But at least the people would like to get access to the internet. So it better come and fix. So I remember I was coming to the office and debugging some GDB cores falling at nights. Fun time, developer fun time.
Now I'm curious, and is it the same in Russia, like I would expect in most countries in the rural areas, people rely on 4G or whatever for their internet access?
I think now, yes. Like when we started, there was just the very beginning of the 4G in Russia. Like we
Right.
were the pioneers there. So, but right now, yeah, like I'm using 4G everywhere. I'm relying on it quite often. So, yeah, I think now it's the time for 4G and 5G coming. So that time, that was the very beginning. It was a very interesting time.
Right.
Yeah, I bet.
Cool.
Okay, well, Anastasia, we got a couple news articles to discuss. Feel free to comment on these, and we'll start talking more about the latest from JetBrains, okay?
Sure.
All right, so this first article I have is the Visual Studio 2019 16.7 preview, and this linked article is going over everything in the new Visual Studio version, so, changes to XAML and WPF and .NET. There were a couple things specific to C++, and that's that they added debugging support for CMake projects on remote servers with GDB server, and they also added address sanitizer support, which we talked about a couple times. This is adding the support for x64, which is great because they only had x86 before, which I would imagine not many people are still using.
Yeah, and if you're like me, you're sitting here reading this and you're going, like, I did not realize that it was like C# and XAML and C++ mixed together. I'm just like, man, that's some weird looking C++. Who uses iComparable and C? It's like my brain was not working.
Yeah, there's a lot of other stuff going on there which might not be relevant to many of our listeners, but some good stuff.
Yeah, but I would say it's still a very impressive list. I mean, like lots of changes, like interesting at least to everyone. Like I was reading through it not only from the C++ perspective, since I'm also working with the .NET team right now. I was reading through it very carefully, I would say, in terms of .NET as well. But C++ parts, like only two of them, but I think they both are quite significant. I mean, the remote experience nowadays is like essential for many people. So having an ability to debug on remotely with the GDB server or whatever you organize that is very important. And sanitizers, I mean, like Windows users are always suffering from like missing any kind of memory leaks detector or something like that, like because the most like the biggest tooling here is for Linux and for Mac, I guess, like Valgrind or address sanitizers from Google. But Windows are usually staying in the corner lonely.
Yeah, there's Dr. Memory that's supposed to work on Windows, but I've never actually gotten it to work, so I don't have anything to say about it.
Yeah, exactly. Like I did a talk at CppCon where I was discussing the various profilers and sanitizers, and when I mentioned the Dr. Memory and asked who is using it, like, I mean, everyone knew about it, but there were not so many people actually using it. I don't know what's going on there.
Yeah.
One of the other non-C++ changes that's listed here, which I guess is kind of a general Visual Studio improvement, is this playlist for tests, which I thought was kind of a neat idea. So if you wanted to just run certain unit tests based on, the code you're actively working on, you could create a playlist so it only runs those tests. Kind of a neat idea.
I could see that being potentially useful, although I must admit at this point, because I use Resharper, C++, and Visual Studio, I don't know what testing features come from Visual Studio and which ones come from Resharper.
I think we still have to check if we work nicely with the playlists.
You might, that's probably a good idea.
Yeah. Okay, next thing we have is an article from Herb Sutter's blog, and this is a pretty big announcement. We already know that the Varna meeting that was supposed to be in, that's supposed to be a week from now? 4 days, yeah. That's been postponed, and they are now officially postponing the November meeting, which was supposed to take place in New York. And it sounds like this was not necessarily the C++ committee's decision on its own, but that the ISO, like the larger ISO body, said no one can have any meetings. Is that right? For the rest of this year? I think so.
I think it was mentioned that U.S. national bodies agreed not to meet in person.
Okay, right. So yeah, no more in-person ISO C++ meetings for the rest of this year. There is one planned for February. Hopefully that one will be able to be held in Kona. And as we talked about last week, they are trying to do a lot with their online meetings, and hopefully they can continue to make good progress that way.
Yeah, I just want to say from the slightly cynical side of me, why are we calling these meetings postponed? They're canceled, right?
That's a good question. Yeah.
Or moved online. But
Right.
anyhow.
I mean, I doubt we're going to have twice as many ISO meetings in 2021 if things open up. Yeah.
Like every other month they're going to be flying to another country? Yeah, I don't think so. They already do that anyhow between conferences and meetings and yeah.
Yeah. That's a good
Maybe
point.
if you do twice more work at one, you can count it as two.
Right. Yeah. Or have twice as many people there and count it as two meetings, maybe.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, I'm still planning to go to Kona, whether or not there's a standards meeting there in February. I'm just saying that.
Hopefully everything's somewhat back to normal by then. Hopefully.
Yeah.
Okay, and then this last article is Visual Leak Detector, which, as you'll see from this article, it hasn't been updated in a couple years, but it was built against or last tested against Visual C++ 2015. But I've actually been using it a little bit myself past few days, and it seems to work fine with my project using Visual Studio 2019, and it's pretty handy for finding memory leaks with Visual C++, I think.
Well, since you're the one who's using it right now, Rob, why don't you give us an overview of what it's like to use this tool?
You're basically just including a header, and you need to modify your include and library paths to include the lib file that comes with the tool.
So it's like one of these things that hooks into Melic or something, so it knows what was... Okay.
I believe so. And then you basically just run your app. Your app will run a bit slower and then shut it down, and you get a huge, or maybe hopefully not huge, log in your output window telling you all the leaks, including source and file and line number of where it detected that the object was allocated that wasn't leaked. So it's pretty handy.
So you've had success with it this last
I
week
have.
or so?
Yeah.
Cool.
Okay. So, Anastasia, you have a couple new things to announce, right? Do you want to start off by telling us about Rider for Unreal Engine?
Yeah, sure. Like we just recently launched an early preview for the thing we call Rider for Unreal Engine. So, let's start with a joke. We like doing tools for C++. We have a couple in the family, so we just decided to do another one.
Right.
But jokes aside, seriously, Rider for Unreal Engine is a standalone IDE for creating your games with Unreal Engine, fantastic and very popular engine in the game dev world. And it brings the native C++ support, and it also integrates with Unreal Editor and brings a few features specifically for Unreal Engine developers. So there is a very short link you can use. You can go to jb.gg/Unreal, and it will redirect you to the preview. So the preview means that the version is free for now. You have just to sign in. There is a kind of long form, but we'd like just to know more about how you're going to use the tool and what kind of game development you do. So if you sign in, you'll immediately get a license from us, and you'll get a link to the build, and you can start immediately with the tool. So for now, it's Windows only. So we plan to expand to other platforms. So we plan to be cross-platform with this. And I hope that before the first release, we'll go to Mac and Linux, hopefully this year. So for now, it's Windows only. It now works with just a solution file. So you can open the simple solution you usually use in Visual Studio, just in Rider, and start with it immediately. Actually, in future, we plan to support native project model, UProject. So you don't have to actually even generate solution. Start with the Unreal Engine project model there. So if you go to this page, like I shared, you can see actually the overview video, which is kind of 15 minutes, but it's a nice overview of the capabilities of the tool for now. So those who do the Unreal Engine development with Visual Studio and Resharper C++ actually will find a lot of like known features, because the features for Unreal Engine are actually coming from Resharper C++ language engine. So there is a lot of nice features for particular support for Unreal Engine, like reflection macros, because the Unreal Engine, they're using the reflection based on macros approach, because the C++ still doesn't have a proper reflection mechanism built in. So they're using the macros, and these macros are actually a nightmare, because before you go to Unreal header tool and build them actually and generate the whole stuff, your IDE will know nothing about what's going on there. It will be simple text, and quite often the thing I was actually disappointed with was then when we started with the tool, I was trying to go through some tutorials on Unreal Engine development, and I often see Visual Studio with a red code there. And when I see official tutorial from Epic Games with the red code in the IDE, my heart breaks. I just can't see this. So, and that mostly was because of the reflection there, because there's just a pure text for the IDE unless it starts doing something deeper with it, unless it starts to parse it somehow, run the Unreal header tool or parse it in its own manner. So we do parsing on our side. So we parse the macros, we understand these reflection specifiers, so we provide the completion code documentation for them. We know that this comes out of this reflection mechanism actually. And there is this thing like remote procedure calls we also support, and lots of integration that we're actually doing. So that was a long path to the tool, but I'm really happy with what we actually showed as a public preview. And we are collaborating with the Epic Games team, so they actually tried the tool before the public announcement, and even the Fortnite team sent us some good reviews and very good and useful feedback actually on what they would like to improve there. So we're really grateful to the Epic team for the collaboration and for their help, because there's not much happening about the detailed documentation and how to integrate with the Unreal Editor, but they were really helpful, and they were helping us with some pull requests. So actually, the writer for Unreal Engine is a default, you can use it as a default editor starting from 4.25 Unreal Engine versions. So before that, you have to install a plugin separately, which is now in the marketplace. But with 4.25, you can just start using it right away from the Unreal Editor. So it's very simple and very straightforward. So yeah, that was a good path.
Very cool. Well, I think you may have answered a couple of my first questions about just, I'm not a game developer, never touched Unreal Engine, but I was kind of curious as to why, a custom IDE might be necessary as opposed to just using, Visual Studio or CLion. But it sounds like these custom reflection macros is the main reason.
There is actually a kind of long story, because if most of the people in the game dev, they're truly using the pure Visual Studio, I suppose, because the game dev is somehow occupied by the Windows ecosystem a lot. So most of the people there are on the Windows platform, and naturally they're using Visual Studio as a default editor, which often integrates as a default editor into the engines. I mean, the Unity and Unreal Engine, they all go with Visual Studio as a default. But as I tell you, the experience when you're using the Visual Studio might not be nice if you're not doing the general C++ parts, which are fine. But if you go to more specific Unreal Engine code, then you can do actually a lot, and you can do much better there. I mean, in terms of the language support and the smart editor support. So all the things we try to do, and also we would like to integrate deeper with the Unreal Editor and the Visual Studio. While it helps to install some things and it has some kind of integration, but it's not that deep. So for example, in Writer for Unreal, we finally managed to have the blueprints on board. This is a binary format actually, which stores a lot of information. And if you, for example, have some class in your C++ and you inherit this class in the blueprints, you know nothing about it in the regular C++ editor, but in Writer for Unreal, you will see the derived classes in your blueprints, and you can click and navigate to the blueprints. And also for properties you set in your C++ code, if you, for example, update the value in the Unreal Editor and save, the value will be updated in a special hint in the Writer for Unreal. So you will see these values in the actual editor. This is really very helpful, and it was actually a challenging task because that's a binary format without any proper documentation, you can guess. So, but it's interesting to us. So we like this kind of things in JetBrains. We like dealing with code in this way because we realize that there is a lot of work happening in the blueprints. The games are usually going with both blueprints and C++, and it's nice if we can help people to see what's going on in their blueprints while they're just doing their C++ editing. So, and I would say that people are using the Visual Studio. Quite often they're using Visual Studio with Visual Assist. They also do kind of nice work for Unreal Engine specifically, so they have some very similar features in terms of like reflection support. They don't do any kind of deep integration with Unreal Editor itself because it's just the extension for Visual Studio. You can guess probably don't need it in Visual Studio. So we wanted actually to go forward with that. So yeah, and if we come to our tools, I mean, CLion, like that's a very popular question after we actually launched Rider for Unreal, like why we're not doing this in CLion, because you can guess, like we do CLion as a general purpose cross-platform C and C++ IDE, and we're like targeting it as our main offer for C++ developers, and it still is. But when we come to game dev, like we don't want to overload CLion with all the specifics from the game dev actually, because it's like the target audience for CLion is like it's a lot of general cross-platform projects, it's finances, it's embedded development. We're now digging deeper, and like artificial intelligence, native development, not only with C++, but with Rust and more. So bringing game dev there would be challenging and maybe will overload the tool a lot. And from the other side, we already have Rider, which you might know as a C# IDE. Like if you've ever heard of like you do some C# development or heard something about it, Rider is a cross-platform C# IDE. And quite a big part of its audience is Unity. And like Unity developers, they're coming from various game dev studios. And guess what? When we started talking to them, we realized that many of them are actually doing both Unreal Engine and Unity. They're switching between the engines, like between the projects, they're doing both. And it's natural to them, so not that they're focused around one engine in particular. So, and they told us that it would be nice if they don't have to switch the IDE. Like working with the Unity project or working with the Unreal project would be nice to have the same IDE just to short the learning curve, because otherwise you'll have to like learn two tools. So, and we decided that since we've already done a lot in terms of the integration with Unity and providing like high quality Unity support and integrations there, why not just to do the same for Unreal Engine? And the only thing we needed there was actually to bring the C++ support into Rider. But that's also simple because Rider is like a child of two parents, IntelliJ IDEA and Resharper. Like it's IntelliJ IDEA UI and front end, and backend is coming from Resharper, so for the Rider, so-called Rider protocol. So we just plugged in the Resharper C++ support into Rider, and we got everything ready. So that was kind of easy. And it also actually eliminated lots of performance problems because, you know, Visual Studio, when we run Resharper C++ Visual Studio, we're running into the 32-bit process of the Visual Studio. So we're still not out of process there. There are some work around it, but still the 32-bit process for C++ is definitely not enough, especially if we're talking about Unreal Engine, a huge engine with a huge C++ code base. So Rider actually eliminates this problem a lot because it's a separate tool. It's like separate processes. We do everything on our own. We can control a lot of things there, how we index the things and whatever we do there. So we did a couple of performance optimizations there, like postponing the indexing for the Unreal Engine itself, so just so that you can actually start coding your game immediately. Just open and start it, and we'll index the engine in the background, and you can control if you would like to additionally index some plugins, whatever. So all these performance optimizations are actually working nicely, and we already got lots of feedback from our early previewers that they feel the performance difference comparing to Visual Studio, for example. I mean, the pure Visual Studio or Visual Studio with Resharper C++. So that was like one of the goal.
So I know virtually nothing about this game development world for modern game dev, but I thought Unity, you could develop in either C++ or C# for Unity. Is that,
Unity,
do you know?
Unity for while you develop for Unity, you mostly do the C# scripting.
Okay.
Unity itself is written in C++, but I don't think many people there actually contribute to Unity or doing something around it. They mostly just do the C# scripting. Moreover, when you talk to Unity game developers, they're usually not naming themselves as a C# developers. They're usually saying that they're Unity scripting developers. So that's a completely different world for them. That's funny, actually. But yeah, so mostly it's C#. There are some like scripting languages in addition to that, but it's C# mostly. Unreal Engine, you do the development in C++, and also like these blueprints things. And I guess there are some possibilities for like Python and some other scripting languages, but that's not that popular.
Okay. I was just wondering if the Unity developers would also see some benefit from this writer getting Unreal support in some way because of the C++ integration, but it sounds like you're probably not.
I think they will, because many of them are not just Unity developers. Many Unity developers in the game studios are also Unreal Engine developers.
Right.
Because like today you're doing a project on Unity, the next day you're doing the project like in Unreal Engine. That's quite often. I mean, like for sure there are studios who are focused around one engine, but quite many little studios are focused around many.
So there's something else you said, and I'm pretty curious about this from the CLion and C++ development perspective. You said that you're using the Resharper C++ plugin in Writer for your Unreal support. Is that what you said?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, like we use it as a language engine. So we use it as a backend via the Writer protocol to provide the C++ support in Writer. That's true.
I think something that we've talked about in years past when we've had you on the show is that Resharper and CLion have different code bases, so they don't have quite the same exact features. Are we going to see any of this flowing back over into CLion or the other way now that you're like, oh, sure, it was easy. We just used the Resharper C++ engine in IntelliJ. That's what you said.
Good question, actually. It was not that easy. The Writer itself was actually ready for that because we're already using Resharper as a backend for the main Writer. So in that sense, Writer, like using Resharper C++ was kind of easy task. But we're also using actually CLion there, I would say, because when you do the development, you obviously need a debugger. And if you're in Visual Studio, you probably understand that you have a debugger from Visual Studio, but it's a proprietary software. You can't use it in Writer. It's prohibited by the license. So we checked a couple of options there and did some prototypes and finally end up with the LDB-based debugger for Visual Studio C++ toolchain. This is actually the same debugger we're currently also using in CLion for Microsoft toolchain, and it's also a debugger in Writer for Unreal Engine to debug your Unreal Engine games. Oh, wow. And like the backend is an LDB base, so it's our own fork based on LDB. And the front end is actually coming from CLion because we already have an integration with the LDB in CLion, so we just cut this piece from CLion and put it into Writer. So actually this usually makes us private reviewers a little bit surprised when we're trying to explain them where to report the issues. Because like some goes to Resharper C++, some goes to Writer, and some actually goes to CLion, but still. So we're using the CLion parts in Writer right now in terms of the debugger, where we're using the debugger back in CLion for Visual Studio C++ toolchain. And actually, we do some internal experiments for using Resharper C++ language engine via the same protocol in CLion. And you know that in CLion there is not only our own Java-based, Kotlin-based language engine, but also there is a ClangD-based language engine now. So also working for some kind of a protocol. So it's also our own fork of the ClangD, and we try to move as many features in the editor as possible right now to this ClangD-based language engine. So it's capable of a lot of things right now. And so we'll see how it goes, so which works better. So maybe we'll still need to compare how it works. I mean, Resharper C++ vs ClangD-based engine, maybe we'll keep both. Maybe we'll do some enhancement in that sense. So in the future, we might get the same Unreal Engine language feature support in CLion as well. Like no one is limiting us from that. Technically, it's possible. Just if we decide that that makes sense in terms of the targeting of the tool and like overloading the tool with some extra functionality. But for now, we see Rider as an ultimate game dev IDE, and CLion is just the main C++ offer. So, and if there are benefits in plugging the Resharper C++ engine into CLion, we'll definitely do that. If not, then won't. So that's the story.
Okay.
Is the C++ support in Rider like completely limited to just the Unreal Engine development? Because I know I work on a mixed C# and C++ project. I use Visual Studio and go between both languages often, but there's some developers on my team who really only work on the C# and they actually prefer Rider, and I'm wondering if they could use Rider for both if they wanted to.
Actually, they can. So the story is that we didn't cut anything from the language engine coming from Resharper C++ when we plugged it into Rider. So like generally the same language features will be available. So you can just open your solution file and do some general C++ development in Rider. And that's the proper thing to try right now because you can't open the solution in CLion. CLion doesn't support solution project model, Microsoft project model. So, but you have to realize that right now we're focused on Rider for game dev, so we're not prioritizing the issues coming from the like general C++ support, and especially in terms of the debugger, because the debugger is like a big piece of it, and you can guess that it's a hard work to implement a proper debugger nearly from scratch, even though it's based on LDB. So we handled like the Unreal Engine stuff there more or less nicely for the preview. But there's a lot of things which have to be fixed before it's actually usable for the general C++ things, especially the like native visualizers for the standard library. All these things are kind of currently missing there. So in general, yeah, you can use it as a general C++ tool, and it will work for you nicely, I guess. But there might be some issues, but just feel free to report them.
Okay.
Nice. I've just been curious, like listening to you talk about how the game developers use these things, and I'm thinking in your role at JetBrains, you have like at least dabbled in probably pretty much anything that C++ developers do. Is that fair? Like you have like, so I'm guessing you've actually pulled up the game dev engines and have worked with them and seen what these things look like, so you know how to use all the tools at the very least. I don't know. I'm just curious, like your experience and breadth of experience is probably wider than most people for sure. Just as maybe not the depth necessarily on these topics, but the breadth for sure. Just curious, like if there's anything that stands out to you, surprises you as C++ developers, or something you've learned recently that you found interesting.
I actually learned a lot around the game development in terms of C++, because when we started the tool, we didn't have that many actual game developers in the team. Then we hired a few who actually helped us with many aspects of the game dev. And after that, I actually like reverted a little bit myself back and turned to some CppCon talks from the game developers, from game developer companies, trying to understand what they're actually doing with the C++, because before that I was not that interested in that. I was mostly skipping these kind of talks.
Right.
But after that, I actually spent a lot of time there digging into how do they use the language, so how they overcome, how they deal with the reflection, because that was like surprising to see that Unreal Engine, the very big and popular engine, are actually basing their reflection mechanism on macros. I was like, what the hell are you doing? Like, why? I found out that there are not so many options, like because some people are using like some pattern generation and some other things there, but you need to have reflection somehow. And like macros was probably the easiest working solution for them. And because of that, for sure, you have like lots of issues. It's like there are these things called remote protocol calls, RPCs, remote procedure calls. So, and in Unreal Engine, there is, you just put some kind of reflection macro before it to show that it's like actually RPC, and there are some characteristics you put as a reflection specifiers, like you put something like with validation, and after that you get a function generated with this like suffix with validation, and your code navigation in the editor actually have to understand that this is the same function. You have to navigate there. And the usual C++ editor, it doesn't know anything about it. It doesn't know that this function with this name is actually connected with this function with the same name with some other suffix. So, and you have to put it to the language engine that, if you see this reflection specifier, this piece of text here, you have to understand that you have to navigate to this function. You have to refactor it properly. So when you rename the original function, you have to rename all this with validation functions as well. So it was so interesting to dig into this to see how it works, how the whole system is organized around that, and how they overcome actually all these issues we still have in the language. I mean, the missing reflection mechanism. Also, it was very interesting to see how they work with the memory. I mean, that the array is probably the best structure for all the game developers in the world. I mean, they're usually tuning these structures on their own. I read a lot about ESTL. I mean, how they work with their own STL there because they can't use the regular STL libraries. So it was very interesting. I mean, when I jumped into it, I was surprised a lot, and I learned how they try to actually optimize the language, which is already good for low latency tasks, even better for the game development. So, and all this working with memory and reflection stuff was very, very interesting. So I think I learned a lot, and I'm still learning a lot about them.
What C++ standard did you find the people who were responding to you are using?
Most of them were saying something about C++ 11 and 14, but recently when we did the ecosystem research, we found out that C++ 17 is very popular, especially in game dev. So, and I guess when the reflection comes to the language, they will be upgrading as well. But the story there is complicated. They can't just upgrade because they like the language. They have to wait for the SDK providers, for those who do the consoles, those who do the hardware and provide the SDK for them, for Xbox, for PS4, for Switch, just to update the SDKs as well to use the newest standards. So it's not that easy switch for a new language just because they want. So they still have to integrate a lot of stuff into their code. So, and that's actually another complicated side of the whole game dev development, because that's not only about your game or even your game and the game engine. It's also about a huge piece of software from those who provide the hardware.
Right.
Well, since you just mentioned the ecosystem survey, is that going to be coming out soon? Are there any interesting highlights in that new one?
Yeah, I can share a few. So we're actually gonna publish it, I guess, somewhere in the beginning of June. Okay. So we do it, I guess, since 2017. So building some kind of an ecosystem research across all the languages and technologies we do support since 2017 in order to understand how the ecosystem looks like. Because we work in this ecosystem, we are a part of this ecosystem. We would like to understand how it actually going on, what the things are going on there. So there is a very interesting story regarding this ecosystem research because we put lots of effort into it. We have a big team behind it, and we try to limit the bias a lot. We do translate the survey into 6 languages and have lots of weighting and special promos in order to limit the bias from the English-speaking countries, from United States, who usually fill in these kind of stories when they are in English. So we do validate the results, for example, for C++ against the foundation survey. And it's very similar, but we see this bias coming from, for example, English-speaking people or the audience specific to C++ Foundation, because it's very professional there. I mean, there is a bias to those who do C++ for more than 6 or 10 years for the Foundation survey. So this year, I guess we collected 19,000 responses in the whole ecosystem, and it's about 2K coming to C++. So it's very similar to what C++ Foundation got this year. So I already compared some numbers with them, and it's 42% of the C++ audience are professionals and 30% are students. And there are these you probably know that the biggest top areas for C++ are embedded games and financial development, and we see these areas with the percents in the ecosystem survey, in the research, in the data we got, and we even sliced by these areas for the final results, so to see some differences between the areas. So this all will be available in some kind of infographics quite soon. So we're already preparing the final landing pages, and the raw data will be coming also a little bit later after the infographics will be released, so that you can actually do your own slices and check the data. So the interesting fact I found this year is that we regularly asked about the C++ standards, and we see like 12% of the respondents answering that they're using C++ 20 already, which is great, I think. And like 41% comes to C++17, which is also great. So I really like how the figures are changing like across the years. So for sure we sliced this for embedded finances and games. And as I said, I was surprised because I actually saw 51% for C++17 in games area. So it's really a lot. So it's bigger than in comparison to, for example, to financial area, or embedded for sure is like on C++11 and C++14 mostly. So they're kind of behind in that sense. We also asked people if they plan to move to another C++ standard in the next year. And while half of the respondents, they replied that they do not plan to move, but the other half, they are planning to move. And when you're coming closer to C++17, there are more people who would like to upgrade definitely to C++20. So it's actually good to see that many people are finally going to upgrade themselves to our new standard. It's actually a good move. For sure, we do ask about the tooling. Like, we're very much interested in how we're doing in terms of the tooling in the ecosystem. So there are data for like top IDEs, editors. So there is like Visual Studio CLion and Visual Studio Code in the top 3. And we also slice this as well for embedded financial development and games. And for sure in games, there obviously, as I said, it's mostly the Windows stories. So, and Visual Studio tools are very popular there. So Visual Studio is like the top popular editor with the highest percent comparing to other areas. And like we hope to see Rider for Unreal Engine in this list one day. We also asked about the unit testing framework. It was actually glad to share some good news with Phil, because the cache actually acquires like 14% due to our data on the second place after the Google test. And it's great because it's actually growing, I would say. It's very popular right now in the community. So, and it's good to see it's that high actually. So there is also some information about the dependency managers. So like we see that while half of the people, half of the respondents, they don't use anything specific to manage their dependencies, and like 23% they rely on a system package managers. But the others, they are trying to use some other options like NuGet or VC package or Conan. VC package and Conan are growing, and that's kind of obvious thing we were expecting, but it's still interesting to see the kind of confirmation. Like the top for the project models, it stayed unchanged for many years already. It's CMake, Visual Studio Project, and Makefiles in that order. CMake actually went to the first place a couple of years ago, and so stays there for maybe 2 or 3 years already in a row. So, and again, we sliced all these questions by embedded financial and game development areas. So in the final infographics, you can actually check these slices as well. So yeah, an interesting fact that I actually noticed there, and that's not the first year I'm noticing it, that when we asked about which tools for like guidelines or code quality you regularly use, most of the people, I mean like right now it's something around 36%, they say that they are using the tool provided by their IDE. I mean, nothing specifically, but just the tool from their IDE, which means that we have to be responsible for what the people are using as a tooling vendor, because whatever we provide, they will be using. Otherwise, they won't use this kind of tools at all. Wow. So we're responsible for the code quality in the ecosystem. So yeah, that's just the general overview. So we hope to release the infographics in a couple of weeks probably. I'm not sure about the final day. It's still because we're localizing the results, so it's still in the, I
Okay.
guess, the localization step. So after it gets localized, we'll publish it and it will be available, and sometime after we're going to publish the raw data as well. So everyone, actually, it's free to everyone, so everyone can grab the raw data and do their own slices. So yeah, that's the story.
Very cool. Well, are there any major features of CLion or Resharper that are worth going over? Because it's been a while since we had you on.
Yeah, actually, this year is actually big for us in terms of the company and C++ tools, because the company turned 20 and CLion and Resharper C++ turned 5 this year. So this April we were
Wow.
celebrating. Actually, we did record a very nice video for CLion celebration. The Phil Nash is actually telling some kind of a story there. And he also actually did the music for the video. So it's not only the voiceover, it's also Phil's music there. So let's go and see the video. It's really nice. I really like it. So, and we also did some kind of interviews with the team for Resharper C++. So just trying to find out how they feel about the 5 years in production. So, and if we talk about what's going on there in terms of the features, in terms of directions for the tools. So if we take the Resharper C++, so as you know, we do the engine on our own, language engine, so we're very much focused on C++20 right now, trying to provide as much support for the language features as we can, something not just in the parsing and highlighting the things, but trying to create some interesting code analysis checks or some interesting factorings. And of course, the game dev, which is the major part of the Resharper C++ right now. So the further improvements for Unreal Engine support. We just published some very initial support for HLSL. This is the shader language, so some kind of C++ based shaders. So we did provide the HLSL support in the Resharper C++ 2020.1, and we plan to improve it further, and we plan to work on some Unity shader support as well. So this will be probably coming to the main writer as well. And the third direction for Resharper C++ is definitely performance. So it's still there, no magic. So we still have to do a lot in terms of performance there. If we talk about the CLion, there are kind of more paths there. So we did a lot for remote work, which is kind of trending these days. We all stay at home. We all work remotely. So all the remote modes are very popular in CLion, and we do a lot to improve the performance, to general quality, add some new possibilities there, new options there. Also, we kind of started with embedded in CLion. So we did a few things to support STM32. We supported the platformer frameworks. So we added some compiler support for IR, for CUDA dialect, currently discussing the possibilities to add CUDA and IR debuggers to CLion to see if we can integrate them. So there are a lot of stuff happening there in the embedded area. So I think we're lacking the team members to implement all the ideas a lot. Yeah, because the area is huge, and I really feel a very big passion for it because I'm myself an embedded developer, and I really like what's going on there. All these peripheral views and playing with boards, all this stuff. It's really impressive. So, simply speaking, you can just take CLion right now and debug on some regular chip, right? Arduino, for example, and debug on it and upload some code there, do some interesting stuff on this board. So also we started the prototype for Makefiles. I think kind of top voted feature for CLion for many years, but it's a little bit harder than we've heard because the Makefiles are very diverse. There are lots of things to do with the Makefiles. So we implemented some kind of a prototype. We shared a blog post and suggested everyone to jump in for the private preview. I got quite many emails, I would say, from people who would like to try our prototype on their own projects. And they did, and half of the experiments went okay, half of them actually failed because they were using some tools which are actually spoiling the compiler output, and we're actually reading the compiler output to understand what's going on in the project. So we're actually running some comments to understand what's going on there. So Makefiles is actually one of the biggest direction for us. And also all this stuff around the CLion based engine. As I said, we ported a lot of things to the CLion. So we have the code completion running in the CLion only mode right now, and we're moving like various code analysis checks. We just moved the data flow analysis to CLion, and like some navigation partially works for the CLion as well. So like lots of things there. And we even did some very nice experiment. We collaborated with the author of the concepts in CLion, and we actually merged with the SARS branch before the CppCon last year, and we pushed that to the public build of CLion so that everyone could actually try some features built on top of the CLion, like the support from concept coming from SAR and our own implementation of some specific features for the concepts in CLion. So SAR actually demoed this at CppCon, so he did some nice demo of the CLion's feature in the end of his concept talk. This was kind of experiment because the concepts at this time were not in the CLion master. So we just merged the private branch, like not the private, but the very specific branch of concepts from SAR into our main language engine. So this is the things we can actually do. So we liked the experiments. There were some complications and some tricks there, but we like how it actually went. So yeah, we're doing a lot of things in terms of language support here, like as you've heard, experimenting with Resharper C++ as well. Not sure how it goes further, but at least we'll have some experiments here as well. So yeah, these are the probably main directions for CLion right now. But we have so many things happening right now around us in the company. I'm sometimes surprised because we published this report for the company turned 20. And if you just scroll through it, you can notice so many things happening. We launched the public preview for Space, which is an integrated team environment we do. We launched our own typeface for developers called Monospace. We launched a bunch of educational initiatives, and we started several new offices. So there are so many things happening in JetBrains these days.
Wow. Yeah, you have offices in many countries and cities right now, don't you?
Yeah, it's, I guess, 3 offices in Russia, Novosibirsk, Moscow, and St. Petersburg. The St. Petersburg one is a new one, so we just moved to a bigger office a year ago. Munich office, which is also planned to move to a new building quite soon, I guess, after all these stories with the coronavirus finishes finally. We also opened a new office in Amsterdam, which is a new office for us.
Oh.
And yeah, our headquarters is still in Prague in Czech Republic. And yeah, a couple of offices, mostly for the sales team, but also some developers are in United States in Boston, and sales are in New Jersey and in San Francisco, I guess. So yeah, I guess quite many offices. I haven't been to all of them yet.
Right.
Okay. Jason, is there anything else you want to go over?
No, that's it for me.
Okay. Well, it's been great having you on the show again, Anastasia. Anything else you want to plug or anything before we let you go?
No, I just would like to say thank you for having me back. It was fun. I like it. It's actually great to share so many news around our tools. I like talking about our tools, but also I like to dig into some new things like game dev, and it was a great thing to share some news we have for a game dev and Unreal Engine stuff here.
All right. Awesome. Thanks.
Yeah, thanks.
Thank you.